Go ahead.
All right.
So Jonathan started us with a question about the relationship between social protocols and canonical debate, which is a perfectly relevant question. Let me go back a bit on some of the discussion we had yesterday. I don't know if you read at least Stephen's précis of yesterday summary. Okay, me and Stephen at least are agreed that there's kind of two layers. One is where we have all the claims in the world, if you will, and they're immutable. And then we have, when we speak of refinement, it's since the claims are immutable, we're speaking about the relationship between claims. And he was making the point that at the canonical level, we have curation. We're saying here are all the claims, but here are, best expressed, most meaningful, less ambiguous, all those qualities about the claims that are helping people understand the range of opinions on an issue and the core of the issue. And so there's a curation operations. Now, there's a bit of confusion about what happens when you just correct a typo, but it's the same claim and equivalence relations. But that's on the other hand, that's still the same principle. We have equivalent claims and debatably equivalent claims and non-equivalent claims, and debatably better claims and non-better claims. And then we want at the canonical debate level to be able to say, well, this is the version that we'll all speak about. And if you have another version, explain how it's substantially different or improve it, or, and these are the curation levels. And Stephen wants to distinguish these curation operations of improving the refactorings and improving the structure of the canonical debate, and just debating at the lower level at why is this claim clearer than this one? And is this claim really equivalent to that one? Or could this mean that, and so on. So when we're speaking about social protocols, I think some of the objectives are shared in the sense we want maximum clarity, maximum, if we disagree, we should at least agree to disagree and have common definitions and common, the goal of conversation is aligning definitions. So if there's a disagreement, it's at least not based on a misunderstanding. Mm-hmm. That's one goal. It may not be the only goal. Sometimes you want to decide, sometimes you want to convert, sometimes you want to act. Those are separate goals, but common understanding is a necessary but not sufficient condition for that. And the process of curating claim expression for canonicality and for clarity and for this and that is probably the same as this process of aligning understanding as a necessary precondition to aligning opinions and action and goals and eventually actions. So at that level, I think there's strong commonality. I think that the canonicality is maybe not the full-fledged canonicality that Tim considers, but something like that of finding alignment and agreement on understanding is a necessary precondition for pretty much all that is encompassed in the social protocol project, though maybe there are forms of social protocol that don't need this. Like, for example, the Stack Overflow is a good example, counterexample. Do we need to have alignment and meaning before we choose what's the best answer to a question? No, it arises out of the simple process of voting. In this case, it's not a precondition, but an emergent property. Is that generally the case? That's a good question, actually. Yeah.
That point of having alignment on meaning, and I think what you're talking about is perhaps very similar to what Felix means when he talks about common mental models at the interfaces. And so when do you need those common mental models may be the same places where you need interfaces. So that's all very abstract. But on stack and interflow, there's no interfaces. There's just,
No, because there's an assumed common culture. We're all developers. We all have, the domain is narrow enough.
And also, I mean,
shared assumptions.
The objective in Stack Overflow is usually utility, not truth. So if it works, it works. It's much easier to prove than if something is true. So a good answer is more objectively good in the sense that it provides utility to the readers.
So with what I'm working on with distributed Bayesian reasoning, there's a very clear and concrete need for interfaces, because it's a process where one group of people will form an opinion on the acceptance of some claim, and then another group of people form sort of a conditional acceptance. We believe that, given this claim is true, this other claim is probably true. And then the system puts those two together and plugs in the conclusion from this group into the reasoning of this group. And that obviously needs a common canonical, if that's the correct use of the term, definition of that claim. The two groups are using that claim from different sides, so to speak. One group is using that claim as a conclusion and is arguing about whether or not it is true or acceptable, or they agree. The other is using that as an argument for another claim. But those two groups need to be sharing a mental model for that conversation to be meaningful at all.
Absolutely. No. A lot of what I'm working on is trying to describe what is it to share a mental model, and what is it to share a definition, and how do we describe mental models in a way that allows to verify alignment and to create alignment when it's absent, right? And the diff merge, and that means, and a lot of it is going to be ad hoc in mental model relations, right? Is this a kind of that? Is this truly a property of that? Is this definitional property? Is this proper evidence for that fact, or could it prove other thing? Do we accept that fact? And that's kind of intra. And for me, there's a kind of meta level thinking about this. Is this the same concept as this? And what could the distinction be? And is this a meaningful distinction? And this is at a meta level. But yeah, I agree totally with the goal of distributed Bayesian condition. What is puzzling me is not puzzling me, but the nut I'm having trouble cracking is when you don't have alignment on this. To a point, how should I put it? Okay, you don't have alignment on this, which means when you ask, is there this link between those two concepts? Is this a kind of that, right? Is this a subclass, for example? Normally, in a normal model, you'd have a yes or no answer. In a collective model, you'd have a kind of, well, this is actually a consensus opinion, except a few French people. This is a polarizing opinion. This is, there's huge disagreement on that. And then let's look at why would people disagree on this? Or this one is actually a fringe opinion, and most people don't believe it's true because. Mm-hmm. But in a way, what does it mean? Like, what does that look like data-wise and UX-wise, which is a second, well, they're both important. Saying it's not true or false. And I don't want it to be just a quantification of so many people believe it's true, so many people believe it's false. Like, there may be nuanced opinions. Yeah. There may be people who unask the question. There may be, most people don't have an opinion, or all the experts agree, but there's a lot of non-experts who disagree, that kind of stuff. That's nuances I want to express, and I'm not sure what's a good representation for this.
You talked about fringe opinions, And what I think is a scenario, and maybe this could be another one of the user stories, is when there is a fringe opinion. And the fringe opinion, or a majority opinion, but let's say fringe opinion. There's only a small number of people who think this thing is true, but that's because they know something other people don't know.
Right. No, a fringe opinion is not necessarily wrong. We
Fringe
agree on
opinion
that.
is that this famous person committed a murder, and they know that it's going to come out, because they know this other fact, and everyone else that knew this other fact would agree. If this fact were true, if B were true,
And
everyone
believed.
would agree with A. If what was that?
And believed. True and
Yeah.
believed.
Right, yeah. If people believed B, they would believe A, but people
Yes.
don't believe B, therefore they don't. Most people don't believe A.
Yeah. Yeah.
And so what I want is a system that shows you not just what the majority opinion is, but what I would call the justified opinion. So people disbelieve A because they disbelieve B, but when you examine B, everyone that actually examines that actually concludes that it's true, because someone comes and said, look, here's the evidence. It's not widely known evidence, but people in that discussion can't deny it or don't deny it. They say, okay, yeah, B is true because of this evidence C. So now,
that evidence is fake news, and that.
So now, even though the majority disbelieve A, the system says the justified opinion is that this fringe opinion A is true.
But this is where I agree totally with that goal. This is absolutely fundamental, and it's a primary goal for me as well. But you first have to know that it's fringe. I think that it's not important. It's not. How should I put it? Saying it's fringe justified is a very important use case. It's justified by asymmetric information there, but it's still fringe. But for me, it's true that when I say fringe, I'm thinking more of, and that's a separate. It's not, and that's why I was saying it's not just a number game, right? Like,
well, it's not a popularity game,
yeah, it's not just a popularity game. I agree totally.
And certainly one goal of a good social protocol for me is to get beyond popularity.
Agreed.
And also, I mean, what could happen is that things converge on the most popular thing if you don't or if you're not mindful of how you design the protocol, and
yep,
the majority is not always right, which would be a problem if it always converges on the majority.
And the majority can change their mind even.
Yeah.
So their first impression right now converges on the majority's first impression, which is the absolute worst thing, because that means all their
because it's uninformed impression almost by definition, because nobody has the time to read all the prerequisite data.
Yep.
Mm-hmm.
It's uninformed almost necessarily.
Yeah.
And that's why deliberative polling is important, and that's why, yeah.
If you think prejudice is prejudging, judging before you have the more detailed information, then the protocols almost by definition promote and amplify prejudice.
Yeah, but it's also, it's double-edged right now, because there's the concern. I totally agree with that goal, but I'm always between that and being afraid that this becomes a way to amplify disinformation. Right? Because it's easy to just inject a lie based on a lie, and you say, oh, if you knew this lie B, you would believe this lie A. Yep. And lie A is fringe, and it's based on this other. Right.
And that is not only a concern, it will definitely happen in any platform with any volume.
Action.
And it will happen by deliberate, coordinated groups with agendas, with bots, with trolls and building in Russia, and so it's a major concern. I think the so what I'm doing with distributed Bayesian reasoning, it starts with the assumption that problem is solved, which obviously is not a safe assumption. So that is the other big problem that needs to be solved. The problem of dishonesty, deliberate dishonesty, and trust. And I think there's solutions to that problem, and that's also part of social protocols. But it's that it's kind of almost an orthogonal. Well, no, it's very
not
related, but
yeah, I think it's actually extremely related, because my personal favorite solution to that is to get a track record of people's predictions, especially claims, and verified and unverified claims, of course,
right.
per domain, because somebody can know something intimately and be totally wacko about something else. That happens frequently.
If you have what you're talking about is a reputation system.
Is a reputation system, but
and,
based on a record of predictions, and getting people to make the claim system into, there's these, you're probably familiar with Tetlock super forecasting.
yes.
Research. Yeah. In all these prediction markets and this and that. So getting people to make falsifiable claims so that they can build their reputation, and then that reputation becomes a basis. The bots will come with presumably almost no your reputation, and that becomes a much better basis.
Yep. Although a bot can gain reputation, and so these systems are still with enough determination manipulatable. Again, I'm not saying it's impossible. I think there is a solution.
It's going to be an arms race. It's going to be continuous improvement.
Right. So, but reputation based on past, reputation for credibility based on past predictions is a great idea, as long as you start with some way of judging whether the prediction was correct. And that requires inputting facts into the system, and that requires perhaps some sort of curation. And so with a trust and reputation system, sometimes you start out with a seed of trusted people or actions that are considered to be good. So therefore, people that take these actions by upvoting or downvoting in certain ways earn reputation. So starting with that strong seed is one technique, but may not be sufficient.
That's probably true.
Enough attacker.
Can I quickly interject with a question? What is there, or is there already like an agreed upon definition of claim? Because I'm relatively new, and I'm asking myself, what is the threshold at which point we don't consider it a claim anymore?
So there's something pretty close, right? You guys have really made some progress in defining a mutable claim, an acceptable.
We're working on that very hard. That's why I laughed. It's still work in progress, but I do feel we have progressed. It's work in progress, but we're not at the 0 point. It has felt like that for a long time. We were turning and running in circles for a long time, but now I think we're definitely building and moving forward.
Because I've been thinking about that a lot as well, and I think because I'm doing research in opinions, and I think this is also an ill-defined concept. And it's easy to get in a much too confined space of only like true false statements, which are very constricted to only using terminology that is perfectly defined, and then you're constricting the space of statements that you can make more and more. But if you make it too loose, then it's too generic.
Yeah, this group has really explored those questions pretty thoroughly, and mostly it's been Marc-Antoine and Stephen and Tim, I guess, have really explored those questions. The glossary, we should maybe see if I can.
I have it.
Has the definitions that have been made so far, which have some pretty good examples of what does and does not meet the definition, and it includes.
You have to allow me to share screen.
Oh, sorry. Yeah, I have to wait.
Or paste in the link, maybe.
Yeah, I could do that as well. Let me find it. I had it. No, that's the user stories. What you want is the Trello board. Let me actually just get it. It's easier.
You might not have access.
There's a Trello board.
Okay.
But there's a lot that's not on the Trello board, and there's a lot that's kind of in between. We've been working also, there's a lot of diagrams and this and that. We don't have full agreement, but we're definitely converging. But we do have the notion that it's when you speak about beyond true and false, and it's a perfectly valid question. I do think that we are going with the kind of language act idea that a claim is something that can be said to be true or false. But there's also, not all claims are clear. And it's more about relating claims to other claims, saying this claim is a interpretation of another claim, and the original claim was ambiguous, and the second claim less so.
So I think what you just said may need some may not be, I would not put it that way. I think the definition that I have is very clearly that the claim doesn't have to be regarded as, so I'm looking at the definition of immutable claim, and it doesn't have to be regarded as true or false. It is something with which people can agree or disagree.
If you look at, yeah, agree or disagree. Yes, you're right.
Yeah, and then it also, I mean, what I've been thinking about for the definition for opinion would be like a probability distribution on an ill-defined hypothesis. So a hypothesis which is not a hypothesis in a scientific sense, but we apply like this logical or rational approach to things that this approach is not necessarily suited to. And
well, it's
that's interesting to look at. I'm looking at things in terms of probability. So a probability distribution on a hypothesis.
Yeah, I'm trying to do that too, like in the Bayesian sense. Yeah.
It's complicated because what we find is often a claim has a lot of, can be unwrapped in many ways. I'll give an example. Let me make a very controversial statement, not something I believe, but I'll make a I think we should let the unvaccinated people die. You know, here there's a should.
Yeah.
And that's and there's a claim about there's an underlying premise that I think if we don't do anything, they'll die. There's I think that's proper, which I don't. And there's the question is it proper according to anything that anybody could agree? So you could agree with there's a problem there. You could agree with, yes, you do think that. That's a claim. And when we're speaking about statements of fact versus opinion, I mean, the deontic, what is proper? And I think it's very, very important whenever we are speaking about claims to separate the factual and deontic goal-based level. You know, I think that doing this will lead to that consequence. And I think this consequence is to be avoided. And those are two totally different levels of the claim. And I think separating them is essential to any decision-based system, because what happens is it's less and less true now, but it used to be easier to get agreement on the factual aspect than on the desirability aspect.
So in practice, those claims will be separated in the course of argument, because when someone makes that claim, someone will either say, the vaccinated people aren't going to die, don't be silly, or the unvaccinated people aren't all going to die, don't be silly, or they're going to say, look, it doesn't matter if they're wrong, they don't deserve to die, right? They're going to make something like that, some sort of argument, which would naturally branch off into to the different normative and descriptive claims. And so it doesn't have to be done, I think, necessarily at the curation level. I think it kind of naturally happens at another level, the argument level, or whatever you call it. So another, my approach when looking at scoring and these different types of claims, my approach is to simply generalize. A claim is something that you can agree with or disagree with, or accept or not accept. The latter terminology is, I think, more in use in academics. Agree, disagree is more something you'd want to put in a user interface. I think that's what people are used to. My system works with generalizable claims, and so it's not trying to predict the probability that something is true. It's trying to predict that the probability that sort of a fully informed ideal Bayesian reasoner would think that this thing is true. But actually, it's even more general than that. It's the probability that a fully informed ideal Bayesian reasoner would agree with the claim.
Yeah, and it's true that way. My distinction between factual and deontic is not absolutely necessary to the Bayesian reasoning, and you can generalize that. Fair enough.
Maybe as well. I mean, I'm always a little overwhelmed with if it's even possible to find a complete delineation of different levels of claims, because so you already pointed out, for example, a statement containing should, which is something that I observed as well. Like it's a pattern, basically. Yeah, and
it's a class. Philosophy has done that classification. Is it good, useful? I think it is. But what I was trying to point out is when people agree or disagree with the claim, we should be very weary that they're agreeing or disagreeing with the same thing. And that's why I think it's very important to work out, okay, what is being claimed here? And there's usually, most claims wrap many implied claims. And something that Jamie's been doing in Society Library that's really important, I think, is the identifying the implied claims, like in the case of dog whistles. Dog whistles are really fascinating to study, right? Because the dog whistle is innocuous to agree with on the face of it, but there's an implied claim that is, that one would or would not agree with on a totally different basis. But there is this notion that this claim evokes that claim. And that for me is extremely important to, again, explicitly tease out. So I could say, I agree with the claim as stated, but I know it's also meant to mean this, which I don't agree with, and
so
make that explicit.
Teasing out these things and formally representing them it's necessary to reach the bottom of things and to have productive argumentation. In many cases, not, because you don't really need to dissect a claim too much if there's agreement, and
it has to be at need as exactly. Need arises. There, I'm with you.
Yeah. That's the idea of progressive formalization,
which has always been the basis. Yes.
And so I think even people will do some of these things as needed, but informally as well. So someone will say, okay, we should do this, but what's your goal? And people will, in more colloquial terms, we should do this, but who's we? And what's your assumption about what's good and bad? And what are your values? And the system doesn't necessarily need.
What do you think that will achieve?
Special features and special aspects of the model to represent these ideas, because they can all be just represented as text-based arguments.
Yeah, that's it's true that I've gone far in the rabbit hole of representing this, and maybe it's not absolutely needed. It's a good question. Stevens persuaded me that there has to be a textual representation, because not everybody reads formalese, so to speak, and there's so many different formal languages, and it's dubious that we'll ever agree on one. We may have one in the system that is used for deduplication, but that's not the same as saying that the community agrees that this is the formal language we should use. And we'll probably have many at any given point. So all that said, there has to be a textual representation. That means everything has to be expressed at the text level. And my concern with teasing out, it's more about can we really express that in the model? And I think sometimes it's, how should I put it? Teasing out is about making distinction between what is claimed. It's about saying, you know, this claim as stated, I'm not sure what it means. It could mean this, it could mean that. And it's not just adding preconditions and consequences. It's about adding distinctions. Understood in this way, I think that's true. Understood it that way, I don't think that's true. And this is a different mechanism than just the pure Bayesian network. And this is like thinking about those teasing out use cases, because they're use cases, is about, can I express this in the pure Bayesian network? And I think that what I'm trying to express with teasing out is the meta reasoning about claims, which is in the meta claim level, which is not captured in a Bayesian network. And I think that's a problem with a lot of traditional decision support applications, is there's no support for the meta reasoning and discussing, does this claim really imply this? Does this claim, and for me, that's fundamental,
Yeah,
being
so
able to express that stuff.
And the meta reasoning, by that you mean everything that is done to essentially clarify the interfaces to make sure that whether we disagree or agree,
Yeah,
we're
exactly.
Plus
Yeah.
the protocols as well, right? I mean, that's where the protocols come in, basically, because you have to have a way to curate that kind of content and find, basically find a way to accumulate scores for ambiguity, for example, or so on, without centralized control, because that's like, it doesn't scale in terms of work for the control.
Yeah, I agree. I think that the curation process is viewed by Tim and other people in this group as something that needs to be pretty done by moderators. And I'm not sure that's necessary. I think you can decentralize just about any process, including curation.
I think you should as well, just to like economize the exorbitant amounts of works that you would have to do
Yes.
if that scales at some point. Like if it becomes too big, it's going to be an unmanageable amount of moderation work.
Yeah, I
Yes.
totally. And there's a general idea of how I think you and Stephen have talked a lot about just the reinterpretation model. So someone says something, and at some point during the discussion, you realize that the statement was ambiguous, and that the people in the discussion did not have the same concept in mind when they made their comments. And therefore, the discussion is incoherent in a sense.
Yes.
And so what do you do about that? And I have just a general process in my mind, you know, when I think about building social platform where these conversation takes place, is that at some point, somebody can just submit a restatement of something that they agree or disagree with, or any claim that has been made, or any comment that has been made. And I think this would be powerful even in Twitter and Facebook now. You know, you say something, everyone shows you why you're wrong. And if you actually realize, okay, wait a minute, you know, maybe it would have been less controversial. You know, I stand by what I said, but I should have used this word instead of that word.
Do you mean this, or do you mean that? And then people could say, yeah, no, that's
Right.
what I meant, not that.
Exactly, and everyone can. So the author or anybody can submit a restatement. And now if you've engaged with that, the system will now show you, look, hey, someone's submitted a restatement. And if that's what you meant all along, then now every action you've taken since that now applies to this new restatement. Now other people, they meant something else all along. So every action they've made, every vote, every comment they've made in response to that original ambiguous claim sticks with the you know, the original ambiguous claim.
That's what I call the concept split.
Concept split, yep.
And of course, there's the converse, the concept merge. You thought you were talking about different things, and oh, we were talking about the same thing all along. Let's merge these concepts and all the statements made about them.
Yep. And
how would you, sorry, go ahead.
So the split is done, I think, ultimately by the participants in the conversation, who each uniquely decide what they meant, and then they can decide if someone meant something else, if they want to go and participate in that conversation based on that new understanding or not.
Go ahead.
That's all. Yeah.
Now, the problem, the hard problem, it's always at the fringe, right? I believe totally in that process. I think it's important. It's important to be able to restate. It's important when there's a substantial difference between meanings. The problem is often you will progressively improve a definition. You know, when I said this, I meant this. And some of these are more substantial than others. And there's all this range between correcting a typo, as I said, and restating, changing the substance of the definition I was using. And at what point do you want to stop propagation? Because if you have, then, you know, I'm changing the definition of a term, and then somebody who was using that term in a claim has to review, okay, is that claim still make sense with a new definition or not? Which definition was I using really? Because it's two definitions now, because it's been split. And then, and again, I'm worried about the progressive drift, right? You make small change, and at some point, okay, no, this is not what I meant anymore. And now I want to reinstate what I meant at the original is a separate one, right? You want to do an a posteriori split because the original has drifted. So do you want to be updating at each micro level, and then you made that claim based on that, and somebody used that claim in an argument, and now maybe that argument needs to be revised, and so on the whole chain. Like, does it create, how much of it, how is the cost of bubbling updates of small incremental concept formalization or disambiguation or precision, or, you know, there's this new, oh, well,
yeah. I think I see more or less what you're saying, and it could get to be a real mess. You have a gazillion restatements of everything, and so there needs to be the protocol needs to somehow filter for value, the restatements that are adding
substantial
value. So, yeah, and so one maybe look if you
no, it's not the same. You can add value by clarifying, for example, without changing the meaning.
Well, but if you submit what you propose to be a clarification, it's not certain that still results in a split, because it's not certain that everybody was thinking that way. And so
exactly, it may result in a split. And this is where the social protocol matters. It's like people who are using that, get a sample of them, say, is that really insubstantial? Yeah, okay, let's go on. Or
there's a split if at least there's one person that doesn't go along.
Exactly.
And
what if
so
you added something like version control to it? Like, because language is always changing. I think that's a very valid concern, that this changing or change of meaning in a concept might lead to a trickle-up effect.
It's obvious to me that version control is part of it, in the sense that for me, I'm dealing with immutable and relation between immutable objects, not mutable objects. However, there is this stream of identity, like this concept's been improved this way, improved this way, improved this way, improved this way. And those are all addressable individually, like in version control. But at what point does it become really important to, that's what Stephen calls a base layer. And the canonical layer is about saying, let's make that the community definition that we all agree on. And at one point has the community definition. When does it need to change? When has it changed enough that it requires revising anything based on it, and blah, blah, blah. And that's the curation level.
Maybe there's also like a split between a language level and a meaning level, which needs
well,
to
that's what I'm saying, the difference between substantial definition, substantial changes and non-substantial changes, what Wikipedia calls minor edits, right? But minor edit is totally a business. And again, this is supposing a non-hostile environment. In a hostile environment, people will hide substantial changes in so-called minor edits.
So minor edits, I think even minor edits, couldn't there be a crowdsourcing solution that doesn't require, it doesn't even require a global community consensus on which is the correct edit, just whichever interpretation or whichever reinterpretation gets the most engagement by the community.
I agree.
If someone submits something, everyone ignores it because they don't think it's adding value, and someone is just splitting hairs and it's not helping to clarify or resolve the disagreement. then they might just ignore that restatement. But just like, the popular, and so the popularity is exactly what I want to avoid, but there needs to be some sort of social protocol that identifies arguments that are important somehow, arguments that
Yes.
are influential. And even if they're wrong, we need to
Yes.
start with that, because people, you're going to have bots and all sorts of people submitting garbage, submitting stuff that doesn't even make sense. It's not even relevant.
Yep.
And so there needs to be a process, not based on popularity, but that filters these top arguments to the top. And I think the same or similar process should filter proposed reinterpretations, because in a sense, a proposed reinterpretation is a response to a comment, just
Yes.
like an argument supporting or opposing that argument.
Yes.
And in the user interface, someone makes a claim, and then maybe what you have is the top supporting or opposing claim, but maybe you also have a reinterpretation proposal that's even higher ranked, because and you kind of treat that almost as a comment or as a response, or even as an argument. In a sense, you said something and somebody says, dialectic or dialogue is this. Someone says something, someone responds. Someone says something, someone responds. And supposedly the goal is fairly cooperative, to find agreement, or at least common understanding. And when you disagree with somebody, that's often, the goal is exploratory. It's you say, look, you think this. Here's a reason why I don't think this. And I'm telling you this not to make you look bad, or to necessarily even to prove you wrong. It's just that I want to know if you also believe B, and if so, why do you still believe A? Because it seems to me, if you believe it B, you can't believe it A. And so what's the C that makes you still believe A? And so it's trying to induce a response that will, from somebody else, that will provide information that'll get you closer to agreement. And so this clarification, it's the same thing. It's sort of a query that also, first of all, is this what you mean? And then, given that this is what you mean, why do we still disagree? And now respond with C. In any case, you're still responding with C.
Yep.
To that reinterpretation request.
I get the impression that historical dialectics was as much antagonistic as cooperative truth seeking. Both were real models, but that's irrelevant. The Hegelian dialectics is fascinating in that it starts from a positional to achieve synthesis.
Yeah.
But the debate, Jack Park often says, so many argument systems are so based on the pro-con structure.
Yep.
Which is the classical debate structure. And he calls this is a pissing contest, right? What's really important is that the structure is open to questions, and that changes the dynamic. If you don't have space for questions in the argument structure, you're in trouble. And I go further. Questions are in the classic IBIS view of the conversation. For me, the problem with IBIS view is it's good at co-constructing the cooperative dialectic process, but at some point you want to achieve a result, and for that, to present the result, your conclusions, and that requires a refactoring of the tree, because the historically built tree is not necessarily the clearest tree, because you want to put some questions at the basis rather than in the leaves where they occur in a historically built dialectic tree. And so refactoring, I think, is fundamental.
So this reminds me of, there's a whole academic field of social epistemology and belief merging, which is related to computer science, when you have artificial intelligent entities that have different sets of beliefs. How do you merge that set of?
I may not be aware enough of that field, and I should look into it. Thank you for the reminder.
I actually found an overview article that I thought was pretty good.
I would totally want this.
Why don't I paste some of those in? And there's some interesting, one of the big kind of fundamental dilemmas that has spawned a lot of papers in that field is something called the deliberative dilemma or the doctrinal paradox. And it says, if everybody agrees on some doctrine, like A and B implies C, or if and only if C, and then you have them vote on these individual propositions, and the majority vote on A, and the majority vote on B, and the majority believe and vote consistently on the doctrine. So the majority, if they believe A and B, also believe C, and if they believe C, they vote on A and B. You'll find that it's very possible that if you then total up the aggregate belief on each of the propositions, that the majority of people believe A, the majority of people believe B, but the majority of people do not believe C. And so the group as a whole, if you try to aggregate it and say, here's an individual entity, and the entity's beliefs, that often is, the courtroom is the example. The court decides A, the court decides B, the court decides A and B implies C, the court decides not C. And it's a fascinating paradox, I think. And like a lot of paradoxes, it doesn't necessarily do help you other than kind of get you thinking about these things. But
I'm sure that's true. I have no doubt. I mean, consistency is not exactly a prime feature of the human brain.
It's not a wrong problem with people. The people are all consistent.
And I was going, well, I don't think they always are, but that's another story.
No, I mean in this.
But you are right that this may not be the issue there. What is important, I think, is a process of finding out why. It's okay, you believe A and B and not C. Okay, what did we miss in the A and B implies C? Is there another precondition? Is there another rebuttal to use Stulman's terminology? And why can you still maintain C? There's a reason. There has to be a reason. What is the reason?
Well, in this example set up in the doctrinal paradox, everyone agrees A and B implies C, and everyone that agrees with A and B agrees with C. The problem is not examining human beings' beliefs and inconsistencies in beliefs. The problem is an emergent one when you try to aggregate beliefs and make statements about the aggregate beliefs of a group of people.
So it's more about the arrows paradox.
Yeah, it's very similar. And so, in fact, that has given rise to an impossibility theorem. And there's a couple of authors, List and Petit actually, that have said, aha, this impossibility theorem is actually very, very similar to Arrow's impossibility theorem. One is about beliefs and the other is about preferences, but they all kind of touching on the same phenomenon, the same paradox that arises when you try to when you try to aggregate beliefs or preferences.
It's easy for me to see one case, for example, is where everybody agrees on the implication, say 60% agree on A, 60% agree on B, but there's only 20% overlap.
Exactly. Yep.
That's an easy counter example.
Yep. And so that's exactly why the paradox exists. 60, it's.
Yeah.
And so what the problem is when you aggregate and you say the group thinks A, the group thinks B. No, the group only thinks 60%, probably A, probably B. And even if you believe A and B implies C, it doesn't necessarily mean that probably A and probably B implies C.
Well, I think actually the reality is people might, let's assume people agree A and B implies C. That's not the issue. But the reality is 60% A and 60% B does not imply 60% A and B.
Exactly. Yep. Exactly.
The rules of composition are different for social belief than for individual belief.
And so you have to look at social belief in terms of probability. What's interesting is in the literature, people are wrestling with this paradox and they don't just, it disappears once you look at belief in terms of probability instead of black and white. And for some reason, that's very infrequently mentioned in all the literature, which surprises me.
I understand. Though, Well, in Bayesian, you'd look at A given B and B given A. That's how you do it.
Exactly. Yep. And if A and B are not independent, what that means is there's a reason, right? That means that A is a reason to believe or disbelieve B. So there's what's called sort of a latent belief in there. You want the argument system to give explicit expression to that latent belief.
By the way, since you're working a lot on probability, are you using the Pearl's causal reasoning framework?
I'm not, no.
You know of it, right? No?
I've heard of Pearl, but I don't think I could even summarize what it is.
Okay,
by the way, I've got to leave right at 10, but
okay, that's a conversation we need to continue. I'm very much in touch with somebody who uses Pearl for scientific work. Mm-hmm. And I'm keeping that link alive because I'm aware that at some point I'll want to get into the probabilities, and then I will want to use Pearl, because I do think it is a real revolution in the way to handle probabilities. Evidence, the notion of evidence. Now, it's not about the social level, but I think it does go further than Bayes. It includes Bayes, but it goes further than Bayes for distinguishing evidence. And I'm very happy to go deeper into that.
Yeah, so causality is a really key question that I'm trying to address. There can be an association between belief in evidence and the belief in the conclusion, but it might not be causal at all. The two might have a common cause, like it's because you're a Democrat. Yeah, you believe A and B, and B is just your justification, but really your belief in A is.
And Pearl really has a framework for distinguishing these.
Yeah, so I definitely should read about. Yeah, I'll look into that.
I don't think it's avoidable given your line of inquiry, sir. And I'm happy to discuss what little more I know with this when you have time. This is important.
And I'll give you guys some reading as well with that.
I would love to. Thank you.
Aggregation stuff.
But I agree that this is the proper framework to handle the aggregation issue.
Do we have like a suggested reading aggregation mechanism in the group, like somewhere where we collect all these things?
No, that's a problem.
It might be a good idea to have something like that.
I think we have a documents channel in the Slack, if I remember well. Related academic work has a lot of stuff.
Yeah.
Oh yeah. That's yeah.
Yeah, maybe we just add a section there for. Where is that academic work?
Hash related dash academic dash work.
Okay.
In the CDL Slack.
Got it.
Okay.
All right. Well, I'm going to run.
Have a good day. Thanks. Good conversation. Thank you.
Yes. Let's keep it up. It's really cool. I'm going to stop the recording.